And I think it's critical around the concept around data privacy and what customers want. Like, what value do individuals have around their own data in the future?
Welcome to the Craft Podcast / Clubhouse show with Veronica and myself. We created this podcast to talk about craft because I think the more craft people know in the world, or the more trades they know, or just learning how to do something, I think our world's going to be off in a better place. Veronica, I'll pass it off to you to introduce our guest today.
No, absolutely. So we're going to be hearing a little bit about craft today from our guest, Nevin Vages. Welcome, Nevin. Nevin is currently a leader in marketing technology sales at Amazon. It sounds exciting.
It sounds exciting. Interesting work. Some not so average days. It's either really positive or really negative, depending on what I'm doing. So, but thanks for the invite, and I'm looking forward to conversation.
So, Nevin.
Absolutely.
So, Nevin, what would you say is your craft? It could be one thing or it could be multiple things.
Here's what I do, and then I'll sort of break it up into two things. I do programmatic advertising and I do sales. Each of those can sort of be a craft or a career by itself. I think what I do is kind of unique because it combines both these things. I come from a sales background. I have been focused on doing sales in some way, shape, or form in a client-facing setting, probably for the last 15, 16 years. And so what I've been focused on doing is really trying to take a true consultative approach to solving client problems. And with that, deepening relationships. That's step one. Step two is programmatic advertising. And programmatic advertising really is, at its basic function, using technology to divert ad dollars and advertising to an end customer in some way that is meaningful. And it's using that technology instead of human intervention. So you combine that together, you sort of have my current craft, if you will, which is programmatic advertising and sales together.
So a lot of follow-up questions for you on that. But before we dive deeper, I'm just wondering, how did you wind up in this business? Were you a little kid wanting to grow up and be in programmatic advertising? How'd you find yourself there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. No, I did not grow up thinking I was going to be on Mad Men. That was never an intention. Mad Men was on the air probably 20 years after I grew up. I kind of grew up loving Star Trek. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to go into space and build rocket ships. I went to university, graduated with an engineering degree, and realized that was literally the last thing I ever wanted. First chance I got, I went into strategy. I did strategy for about 9 years, give or take. In it, I did healthcare consulting, I did financial services consulting. I then had a little break and I did some investment banking. And investment banking, by the way, is the only career in the world that makes strategy consulting seem easy. And so I left it. I was like, I never want to see that again. Went back to the 80 hours a week, which seems super doable in strategy consulting. But then I started to go into something I was actually really passionate about. I did international development, and I worked with large NGOs and foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, voluntary services overseas, the Gates Foundation, different parts of the world. Did that for about 4 years. I got really burned out, got married, wanted to have a much more normal lifestyle. So I took a year off. I ended up volunteering in a charter school for a period of time. But this company called App Nexus reached out, asked me if I want to do strategy work for them. And I literally told them, I don't know what a programmatic ad is. And for those who are in this space, advertising, I did not know what an IO was. I literally knew nothing. So I went for the interviews, and as you can imagine, I didn't do so hot. Didn't get that job. But they asked me to come back. And they said, look, you've led teams, you led diverse teams, and you've led account partnerships. Why don't you lead up our enterprise account management role? So I did that for a period of time. They trusted me to lead up their new business effort. So I did that for a period of time. And then I led up one of their global relationships with Xaxis, which is a part of a large holding company called WPP. And then, frankly, had a sidetrack, but then Amazon called me and asked me, hey, do you want to lead our services org? And I said, yeah, it sounds, why not? Amazon is Amazon. It seems like a cool place to work. Went in, immense challenge, but it's been a lot of fun. Led the services org, now lead this part of the sales org, where I lead the go-to-market for our full advertising technology stack across a couple of different verticals. So that is a long story short of, you probably wanted a 30-second answer of how I got into programmatic advertising. I gave you like a 5-minute rundown of my life post high school and college.
No, we wanted every minute of that.
Yeah, I think it's obviously interesting to hear people's career journeys because rarely is it linear or in one function. And I think just hearing people have their own twists and turns and explorations is good for part of our audience who are newer in their careers, who may think that everything has to be perfect. But
That's absolutely
exactly.
not true.
So Veronica got to ask the fun question, but now it's my turn. So my question may be a little bit more dry, but I'm actually super curious.
Yeah.
What is programmatic advertising? High level.
So it's interesting, right? We also think programmatic advertising is super complex. Everybody makes it seem like the most difficult thing in the world. Here's what it is at the simplest level, if you really wanted to get down to it. It's how you take and deliver an ad from start to finish without human intervention, right? That's the basic premise of it. Advertising historically has worked with Nevin, let's say having $10,000 to spend, calling Jonathan at Condé Nast and saying, Jonathan, here's $10,000, run these ads for me, right? And that's what Jonathan would have done. Programmatic advertising takes that to another level. It says, you know what, let's break the human to human conversation. Not that it's not important, but let's get rid of some of those inefficiencies and let's use technology and consoles to make this much more efficient. And that's what programmatic advertising's intention is to do, to make the transaction of dollars between the advertiser and the end customer who's viewing the ad seamless and meaningful with technology. So that's what it's really doing at the end of the day. It's using consoles, using technology to get the ad dollar from start to finish without human interaction. Yeah, Mad Men. Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about it in real time. What that means. Let's say you take $10,000, Austin, and you're working for Pepsi. You at Pepsi will give that $10,000 to your agency. I'm going to get rid of any sort of cost that agencies and everybody else takes out of it. I'll make it very simplistic. The agency has a media planner. The media planner will say, okay, out of that $10,000, I'm going to spend $2,000 in print, $3,000 on TV, but $5,000 on digital ads. Those $5,000 in digital ads, I'm going to run that programmatically. I won't get into digital TV. I'll leave that off the table. I'm going to put that in different types of inventory I want to buy. Inventory is usually around websites and where people view an ad. So what you then do is you give that $5,000 to a trader. The trader utilize a console called the DSP, the demand side platform. They put the budget in. They put targeting features in place, such as the audiences they're looking for, the type of websites they're looking at, the bids they want to have for each impression. An impression is what's coming through the pipeline as to when someone sees an ad, and they spend that money. That money will then go into an auction. That auction, and this is, by the way, if it's programmatic auction-based system. So we'll leave, I can talk about some of the other stuff a little bit later. You then bid for that impression, and if you bid that impression, your ad is shown to Nevin Vages at the end of the Condé Nast website. Does that help, or do you want me to go into more detail? That's exactly it. That's exactly it. What you did with Facebook was exactly what that is, which is programmatic advertising at its core, which is using technology to engage audiences and engage end customers and breaking that human to human, belly to belly conversation for that sale. No worries.
So Nevin, when you were talking a little bit about your career journey, it seemed like a little bit that you were on a quest for fulfillment or finding something that's a career that suits you if fulfillment is too lofty a goal. And I wonder, was programmatic advertising that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or do you enjoy what do you like or not like about what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a loaded question, and I'll sort of tee it up as to why, right? People are going to view fulfillment in different ways. When I view fulfillment at this point in my career, it's very different than when I viewed it 6 years ago, where I viewed it 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Programmatic advertising is an interesting career, but the stuff that I do from the sales and coaching perspective, that is fulfilling. And so that's what's most interesting to me at this point in my career, right? I'm able to work with I'm able to coach talented to smart people to advance in their careers. I'm able to identify folks who I think are going to be the next leaders in our organization and help them build a skill set that will help them advance, not just in advertising or in sales or in Amazon, but in the long term. And that's the fulfillment I get. The fulfillment I get is when I see a member of my team get promoted, the member of my team become a team lead, or frankly, I'll be very honest, a member of my team, I've had members of my team lead programmatic advertising and go to Amazon Fashion, or go to Amazon Retail, or go to Kindle, or go to Studios. Recently, a member of my team went to Studios about a year and a half ago. That's fulfillment for me because you can help advance somebody's career, right? And I still keep in touch with everybody. And for me, that is currently what I find most fulfilling, right? That and the smart people I get to engage with. If you asked me this question 6 years ago, I would have said, what I feel fulfilling is what I thought was my ability to impact the world around me and impact developing economies at scale. That's what I thought was going to be fulfilling for me. And it was back then. But as I got older, priorities change, life comes into effect. You have to sort of balance that out. And so that's where I was 6 years ago. 15 years ago, I would have said just having a job coming out of a recession would have been fulfilling, right?
Yeah, right.
And so being able to pay my student loans was fulfilling. So, priorities and concepts of fulfillment for me personally, I basically fully recognize that my concept of fulfillment is going to be very different in 5 years. It's going to be very different in 10 years. I assume that change, and I'm just going to let my career kind of flow with what that looks like in the future.
Well, and I love what you're saying about coaching. When you're coaching your mentees, it's not, are you teaching them skill sets associated with advertising? I guess not if they're, or maybe yes, if they're going off into fashion, but what are you most trying to impart?
Well, yes, you can teach them skill sets in advertising. You can teach them skill sets in programmatic advertising and what that specifically means. Actually, I think my mentors taught me something very early in my consulting career, which I try to impart on everybody else. And I keep using this word, Veronica, so call me out on it, right? And say you use this too much, you need to explain this further. They truly taught me how to think consultatively. And so for me, what does that mean? And I am not an expert in it. I don't want to claim I'm anywhere near an expert on it. It's just a skill set that I built that I think I'm okay at or proficient in some way, which is really getting down to the root cause of a client's issue. Let me explain what that means. The first thing I tell my team whenever we get a new advertiser client that we work with, I tell them, I don't want you pitch advertising, right? That's where you're going to fail. If you're pitching in sales, you're probably going to fail, right? Because, and let's break this down into 2 parts, right? Pitching is important if you're cold calling or you're a brand new client. That's what you got to pitch. But when you're working with long-standing clients, pitching is not how you build long-term relationships. I tell my team to think about it this way. How does that client serve its customers? How does it make money? Not from advertising, not from digital. Just tell me how they make money. Read their 10K, read their annual report, figure out how they make money. The next thing is figure out how are they doing their marketing, not digital marketing, the general marketing. How do they sell their product? Then I say, then talk to me about what are they doing in digital marketing? And then talk to me what they're doing around programmatic advertising. It's that funnel. You got to get to that funnel. You truly understand someone's. You need to, and I'll say this, what Amazon does really well is it works back. It solves for the root cause problem. It forces people to answer questions. And that's what I try to impart on my. Ask so many questions that you are listening 9 times out of 10. So you truly understand the client. And then you could potentially come up with a solution. And what I tell my team is you could come up with a solution, but it's got to be tailored to what a client needs, not what you're trying to sell. And if you can't meet what they're trying to sell, do not pitch it. And be willing to say no, because you'll get more trust with a client if you're willing to tell them actually that we aren't the right team to do it. You need to work with person XYZ. And for me, that's actually generated more long-term relationships with sales than just going and pitching over and over again.
Right. They'll appreciate your advice. And when they do have a project that's directly suited to you and what you do and your team, they think of you. They want to work with you.
Exactly.
That's the same advice I received when I had a brief stint in consulting as well. It was for there's like software for financial services firms. So, the goal isn't to try to get them to upgrade something every year. It's really just to do exactly what you said, figure out, how to help them, which sometimes does involve, selling some software. My mentor story from consulting that I actually could remember, we had to wear suits all day, right? And I remember,
of course.
What's the name of that bag? This is travel bag for suits.
A garment bag?
It's a garment bag.
Yes.
It's a garment bag. And because I was a new consultant, so what I used to do is, I don't know, it's kind of dumb. I paid so much money for this like fancy garment bag. And then the partners all like laughed at me. They're like, John, the only piece of advice I could give you is, when you're consulting, you're always like traveling and you can expense stuff, but still you might like just buy things or eat a lot or drink a lot, right? It's like, just save your money because especially living in New York and you're young, it's easy to use money in like a consulting job. So that was a piece of advice I remember. Switching back to your fulfillment thought, I had a follow-up, which is, I think, at least for me, one way to stay fulfilled, at least for me, is that, I believe I happen to work in a very dynamic industry, which is gaming. And also gaming, most of our customers are younger. And I'm really learning a lot from young people, actually. So back to the dynamism, and I'm a newbie to this space, but I literally just joined Facebook and then I hear about this iOS 14.5, and there's, people are talking about it. So it seems like there's a change in in this dynamic industry. Can you talk a little bit about iOS 14.5?
You mean people at Facebook are talking about how much they hate Apple? I mean, literally, that's just been what they've been fighting about in the press for the last year, Jonathan. I'm surprised you just caught on. Like, literally, they've been fighting. So I'm pretty sure anybody working at Facebook is not going to get a job at Apple. Anybody working at Apple is not going to get a job at Facebook anytime soon, with the amount of vitriol these two companies have been throwing at each other. Yeah, Jonathan, it's a great point. The reality is this industry is going through massive change. And I would argue, and frankly, I've only been in the industry 6 years, but my understanding of the history of the industry, the biggest change the industry's ever faced. And I think it's critical around the concept around data privacy and what customers, what value do individuals have around their own data. And the business model of programmatic advertising has skewed, very frankly, in the last couple of years to hoovering much more data around each individual interaction. What we're able to do in programmatic advertising, which we never do, is actually target individuals. So we'll never target Veronica specifically or Jonathan specifically, but we'll get enough data to put together what Veronica's doing on a lot of different websites and put her into a group and target that group. So suddenly we'll know that Veronica, I'm making this up, likes, tea and, is a 20-something living in New York and buys Hermes. I'm making that up, Veronica. I have no clue.
No. I was like, oh yeah, I can't wait to see what you say. I'm like, no, you're safe. You're safe.
But so it's like we're able to put these profiles together. What's happened in the industry, both with something called GDPR, and I forgot what the initials are, please, or in the EU, which is focused on people controlling their own privacy and data, as well as what happened in California with something called CCPA. Don't call me out on what the initials are either there. I don't really know either. It's all focused on controlling data, controlling privacy, and ensuring that you are only taking into account data and privacy that you currently have engagement with. So why is this change in iOS 14.5 such a big deal? And why has Facebook been fighting it so much? So iOS 14.5 basically says is, if you have an app on our device, Clubhouse, Snap, Facebook, you can use your own data to advertise to people on utilizing the data you currently have. And that's all good. What you're not going to be able to do is utilize that data that we have on any other app or on the web on an iOS device. Why is this an issue for Facebook? Because Facebook uses a ton of data that they gather through their own owned and operated properties, but also offsite, something with the Facebook audience network, and uses that information to advertise and retarget people on their own networks, but also outside of it. So which is why Facebook has been fighting it so much, because it limits the ability of Facebook to target ads to individuals, to target ads towards consumers, because their core business is advertising. And so I don't think Facebook and Apple are going to come to a recognition or solution anytime soon. I'm willing to bet Facebook has come up with multiple, Jonathan's probably been there a month now, but he's probably not going to give away any secrets about what Facebook is doing. Facebook has probably come up with multiple workarounds that allow them to utilize their user data both in their owned and operated inventory. Owned and operated means Facebook.com, Instagram, etc., and also figure out how to extend that outside of it in a way that does not break Apple's policies. Because if you think about it, what's the worst thing that could ever happen to Facebook? They get booted off the App Store and they suddenly lose 50% of their US customers, which would immediately tank their stock from whatever it is to, some fraction of that. So,
Well,
does that
we
answer your
don't.
question, Jonathan? Or
Yeah, it
did I,
does. So now you got my attention because frankly, I'm all about gaming. I'm not even paying attention to this stuff. But now you're telling me, potentially my stock could be half as valuable. I got to go Google some 14.5 deep dives tonight.
Well, the good thing is I'm pretty sure Mark and Cheryl have come up with solutions that, as far as I've seen, your stock has not gotten hit since it's been released. You're pretty good.
Cool. I'll rest assured tonight and then focus back on gaming. I actually had a random question to put you on the spot a bit about privacy, which is my friend and I, we've had this idea and it sounds good on paper, but I feel like you might you may have some perspectives here in terms of practicality and or feasibility.
Do I have to sign an NDA?
No. This idea, I'm sure you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier too. It's about getting data into the hands of the users. So our idea is, what if we had this like app, website, platform where we somehow convince a large swath of the population to enter their own PII or their own demographic information. And then once we hit like a critical mass, then we can get like the Googles and the Facebooks of the world to buy our data. And then we pay the user. Have people talked about this in the industry?
I'm sorry, Jonathan. I hate to do this to you. Yeah, it's been discussed a lot. It's been done a lot. It's not gonna. This was a great idea. I think about 7-8 years ago, man.
It was so
glad we
great
talked
that
because
so
we
many
were-
people have been thinking about it.
Hey,
for
we're not
so
gonna do this
long.
idea. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, the concept. Well, the concept what you have here, Jonathan, is actually an idea that's been thrown out quite a bit, which is, can we convince folks to voluntarily give up their information for some cut of the outcome of the marketing dollar, whether you pay them up front or you pay them on the back end, some cut of that marketing dollar. That has been thought of in the past. There are two parts where this gets broken, and which is why it's not going to work. 14.5 is going to be an issue. iOS 14.5 is going to be an issue because Facebook would not be able to use the data you sold them because it's not data they own and operated. They don't own that data. So unless they specifically bought your app, they wouldn't be able to utilize that data. But even beyond that, I'm going to tell you why that's not going to work in the future. Because all your data is going to be based on the fact that we recognize currently people via cookies. And our good friends in Google will eventually destroy the industry when they come up with their own solution for this and get rid of cookies sometime in 2022. And so that's when contextual means targeting websites where people go to instead of the individual user will come into play. Now, there are other solutions that people are coming up in the industry with folks. There's a company called, I don't know if you all know this, called the Trade Desk, et cetera, that are trying to create new ways of identifying the user that don't rely on cookies, that are privacy safe, et cetera. These new techniques have not gotten mass scale yet. And there is risk to it. And I'll tell you why. Because data is so important and the lack of data personalized data from first-party inventory is so important. It's hard for somebody like the Trade Desk that does not own data to be successful in this play. I'll explain why. Specifically here is if you don't own your own data, like a Facebook, a Google, an Amazon, et cetera, what you're stuck with is trying to buy data from other individuals, which you will be prevented from running. So this is going to impact a company like the Trade Desk or any other third-party individual company specifically, because just this past week, Trade Desk exceeded its revenues, exceeded its expectation, higher earnings per share than any investor expected, right? They blew out their entire earnings report and their stock still dropped 20% the next morning because they have no solution for privacy and data at scale and identifying who that end user is. So that's the issue everybody faces. So go for it, Jonathan.
No, this podcast, pay for itself because I'm going to have to, rewind the tape and listen to this again because you potentially could have saved me just a couple months of I may have learned a lot, but it would have been, at least I know this going in. So this is good.
Well, and Nevin, I know you started out by saying there's sort of two prongs of your craft. There's the programmatic advertising prong and there is the sales prong. And you were talking to us a little bit about sales before. I really want to hear you say consultatively again. I do. I mean that. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit more about the sales aspect of your role and what are some of the qualities you really think you need to succeed in consultative sales and otherwise behaving consultatively. You get a prize every time if you can say it more times.
I'm going to try to do this without saying it. I kind of hit on a couple of key points here. So let's talk about sales and the thing that makes enterprise sales sellers successful. Not using that word, but people who truly understand. I talked about this earlier, understanding the clients. I'm not going to belabor that point. And understanding how they make money and getting to the root cause. That is the number one thing someone's going to be successful at. Someone who is a good salesperson is actually not going to be, and Austin said it, an enterprise sales, not going to be a belly-to-belly person. He's not going to be someone who's going to take you out to dinner and 3 martinis at a local steakhouse, right? And like you could do that, but that's not how, like you will win in the short term. You're not going to win in the long term. What you need is the ability to really understand clients, understand their problems, and solve for that. But you also have to be, and this is the critical thing, and Austin will probably agree with this, be resilient because there's a lot of no, but the no comes from a point of being able to step back up again and going again. I don't look for people who are just cold callers because I think they have the resiliency skill set, but they don't have the ability to go deep. I look for people who, one, are able to understand the root cause, who are resilient. And this is one of the things that we focus on Amazon, understand technology and can sell based on the technology, which means going deep into a product, understanding what the product's flaws are, what their strengths are, and can make a value case against both the strengths and mitigate the flaws in comparison to competitors. So the ability to talk tech and make it simple. What I don't need is someone who could talk tech and confuse the crap out of somebody. That's not how we're ever going to win a single dollar. What I need is someone who can talk tech and make a hard concept simple so everybody can understand. So those are the 3 qualities I look for in a good enterprise tech seller.
Well, and when you talk about something that you look for in a hire, you know, when John and I first started talking to people about craft, it was both to learn more about what people really do day to day and to talk about some of the hot topics in different industries. But it's also maybe to encourage people who might be looking to break into a certain industry inside of entertainment, media, and technology. And, you know, is there any advice that you would give to someone who's trying to break into this area? There's certain jobs where you just kind of have to get the job, but is there anything you can do independently or set yourself up well to get that gig?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. Off the top of my head, I think there's probably 2 or 3 things. One, there are a lot of roles, both at the entry and mid-level point, that you can come into this industry. From an entry-level role, for example, starting as a generalist in advertising is a great way to then build a specialty. So we have a lot of our best sellers are folks who came in as generalists. They joined selling the vast swath of Amazon's products. They didn't need to know programmatic. What they learned is they sold TV, they sold some programmatic ads, they sold connected TV, didn't need to know the tech behind it. But frankly, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. They also sold the advertisements that come on those Amazon boxes. You've probably seen like a movie review or a movie title on an Amazon box. They sell that too. They get there and then they go deep in a subject. That's one way of doing it. And that's where a lot of our great talent is. People just want to break in and start as journalists and then move into it. The second way is the way I did it, which is you build a core skill set. So remember I talked about the 2 crafts? The one craft I didn't have 6 years ago was programmatic advertising. But what I did have was the sales and consulting. And double down on the craft. And once you double down on the craft, you can then take that craft elsewhere, right? So I doubled down on consulting, sales, and strategy, which then enabled me to break into programmatic advertising sales. And so if you build a good enough base of skill sets, you can learn programmatic advertising. Like I said, we try to make it harder than it is. It's simply just wires connected together in a box, making it simplistic. But that's like you can learn it. You have to invest the time to learn it. But if you have another craft that's deemed valuable, you can bring that into the job that you want.
So you're sort of saying it between the lines, but at this point, do you consider yourself a generalist or a specialist?
That's a good question. I think I'm a specialist to the extent that it's in programmatic advertising, but I think my strategy and my consulting skill sets will allow me to do a lot of different things, which is why I think I've been able to do, healthcare and then financial services and nonprofit and now advertising, because that core skill set. I'm not saying I could do Jonathan's job. Jonathan's much better at video games and e-game sports than I am. And Veronica, you understand TV and kids shows better than I ever would. But I think if given the opportunity, I could figure out parts of my consulting and sales skill sets and figure out how I could leverage that into something like entertainment and carve out a niche there and build from there. So I'm a generalist to that extent, but I'm a specialist from the programmatic advertising.
Well, and part of the reason to ask this question in the first place is for what it means in your career development, right? Where might you go next? If you're a generalist, you worry that you won't be qualified for certain roles, or if you're a specialist, you feel like you're pigeonholed into certain roles. But it sounds like with your past, there are many places you could go.
And let's put it this way, right? Being technologically savvy, let's say you're really good at programmatic advertising, right? The reality is so much of programmatic advertising is now going to be connected to data streams, cloud, and cloud infrastructure. But what does that mean? You don't have to just do programmatic advertising. You can leverage that to go somewhere else. You can leverage that to go to Azure or do Google Cloud or AWS. And you could keep migrating, because learning how to talk tech and sell tech is important. Technology is one of those things, Veronica, where it's not constant and you consistently need to learn. And so if there's a core skill set everybody should have, it's learning fast, right? Because that'll allow you to switch from topic to topic, career to career. And that I would argue is the number one thing that will help anybody break into an industry like programmatic advertising. Because you could get a job here, but will you be successful if you don't learn fast? Probably not. But even when you're in here, it's changed so much in the 6 years that I've done it, from where it was 6 years ago to today, that I've had to learn to keep up. But I'm pretty sure I could learn if I decide to go into AWS and learn about cloud infrastructure. Because learning is probably the most important part, being able to sell yourself and being successful in a new industry.
If we were in a coffee shop right now or poetry reading, I feel like it's that moment to just snap, right? Absolutely. Learning fast resonates.
All right.
100%.
Well, here's the final question from me, at least, which is,
this is going to be the zinger, isn't it?
This is the easiest one. We may have done it. We may have done it backwards, but all this talk about, I joined Facebook. I need to learn about ads. It's not a topic in which I really focused on in my career so far. So
this is John's ulterior motive for having you on the show.
Yeah, actually,
he's trying to get a background.
Totally. So I know some things, like for example, we have another guest coming on in a couple of weeks, Steven. He's the head of growth marketing for Amazon Games, and he really got me into like return on ad spend. So that's something I know about. But they're also like just easy concepts, but I want to know the like exact details, if there even is an exact detail. For example, we talk a lot about impressions, right? So is it true that different companies and platforms measure impressions differently? For example, a video impression, is it like X seconds on Facebook versus YouTube? And the second thing is, I've heard about CPM, right? Cost per 1,000 impressions. What is a display impression? Is it just because I searched on Google, it's on my screen, then it counts? There's no time component to a display ad.
Okay, yeah. All right, let's separate that into a couple of different parts. Let's break that down from the end and work our way all the way to the beginning. So an impression is this. An impression is just an ad whenever you see it, right? So for example, if I go to CNN right now and I see an ad, that's one impression. If I turn on and I see an ad, that is one impression, right? And so an impression is just a different way of saying a user is seeing an ad. You're right. There is no time concept for a display impression. It doesn't matter if I see an ad for a split second or I see an ad for 30 minutes in the background. It doesn't matter. There's no time concept. What there is on display ads is viewability. So for example, is the ad on display 100% viewable? As in, if I go on CNN, do I get that banner on the top that is front and center, right? If I'm on the New York Times, do I see that Apple ad front and center on the top? I think actually today it's Hamilton. I think Hamilton took over the top of it, saying they're back on Broadway in September. But viewability is also important. If I show you an impression, if I serve an impression and ad on the webpage, but it's at the bottom of the page and you never scroll all the way down, that's 0% viewability, right? So for display ads, viewability is a very important measure, especially around branding. Making sure that your ads, what people care about is their ads are being seen. You don't want to spend money on ads that are not being seen. That's just, so if I spend a $10,000, but I have viewability of 5 or 10%, I'm kind of wasting 90% of my dollars. I'm wasting $9,000. That's essentially the simplistic way of saying it. I'll get into performance later because you brought up ROAS all the way at the end. Second question, how do people measure impressions? That's a little bit more complicated because you would think there would be a standard way of reporting across the entire industry. But because this is so complex, there is a standard of error around impression reporting. And let's say we call it conversion reporting, whether someone actually does an action based on that ad, right? And that can be different based on the technology used. For example, the number of impressions and reporting that Amazon might show for an ad that Google is also tracking may be slightly different. But that's okay. We expect that as long as the difference is within a threshold. And for different clients and different customers and different agencies, that threshold is usually between 1% and 3% difference, right? Some are okay with up to 5. If you're a 10% differential, that's a big issue. That's a issue with the technology not working. Now, your third question, which is tracking metrics and how do people track metrics? Yes, there are different metrics people track. There's return on ad spend, there's cost per action, cost per conversion. All these basically mean, Jonathan, there's a very simplistic, very complex way of saying something very simplistic. If I show you an ad, and do you do something with that ad? If I show you a pair of Nike sneakers right now on the New York Times, do you click and go buy those sneakers in Nike? Or do you come back 2 months later and go buy those sneakers in Nike? The current technology allows us to track that. It allows us to see which ad we showed Jonathan and did he convert later on, right? And that's what ROAS stands for, return on ad spend, cost per conversion, cost per acquisition. That's essentially what that's getting at. The last thing you threw out there is CPM, which is cost per million. Basically, it's cost per 1,000 impressions, right? That's essentially the definition that exists on there. So I took your question and sort of broke it down to 3 or 4 parts, Jonathan, but that's essentially what you were trying to get at with there. I'm happy to answer any further questions you have in those areas.
No, that's good for me. As I said, this is a good episode. We actually got a lot of craft. Sometimes we talk more about career journeys and like high level topics. This is like meats and potatoes. This is what we're gearing towards. So mission accomplished. I'm super happy.
We got both. We got both.
No, we got both. That's why it's even better. So yeah, Veronica, do you have any other questions for Nevin, or should we end this portion of and then start seeing if there's any questions, Q&A? Thank you, Nevin, for joining the show today.